Hello everyone. So in this tutorial we're going to have a look at how you can go about creating a high poly terrain sculpt inside a ZBrush like this one. The sculpt is also going to be complete with a bit of Polypaint data. And then in another tutorial later on we'll have a look at how you can take this and convert it down to a low poly model with textures. Okay, so to get started you will of course need some reference imagery. I'm having a look at some references like this and some references like this. Now I've actually sampled some of these into a texture, so I've got a few different textures there, and I've essentially done that just by copying and pasting certain parts of it, erasing others, just repeating them on top of each other using a bit of the clone and stamp. If you want to know more about that, I do have some other tutorials on my channel. So you just want a few different color variations of a texture like that. It will really help you along the way. Okay, so let's get started and make the model. So I'm just going to hide the lightbox, go to document, create new, go to preferences, go down to thumbnail, hide thumbnail, create a cube, draw that out into the scene, and I'm going to go to edit, and I'm just right clicking and dragging to rotate around, holding down Alt, right clicking and dragging to move, and then keeping right click held down and just letting go of Alt to zoom in and out. I'm going to turn perspective on. I'm going to make this a Polymesh 3D, and I'm going to change its name here to Sculpt. I'm going to select Skin Shade 4 material. I'm going to turn on my wireframe temporarily, go to geometry, and I'm just going to press Dynamesh there. Okay, and as you see, that geometry is going to be much better for sculpting. Okay, so I'll just turn off wireframe for now. The reference image I showed you, I noticed that the rocks were a little taller than they were wide, so I'm just going to make this a little taller here, and I'm going to Dynamesh again, and I'm just doing a quick Dynamesh by holding down Control and dragging. It automatically will Dynamesh if you've got that turned on. Okay, I'm going to start by using the Trim Dynamic brush. So I've just gone to Brush, just highlight your T, and you see at the bottom there. Shortcut for that brush is BTD. Okay. Going to adjust my draw size here a little bit. You can do that with the bracket keys as well if you want. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm just going to soften out some of these edges. I don't want them looking too hard like that. Another brush you can also use is the Trim Adaptive. This can give you quite a nice little effect around some of these edges if you want to just be a bit more schematic with it. Obviously watch your intensity whilst you're doing stuff like this. Okay. You can get a bit more of an organic feel there. You can mess around with the alpha. I like to put a square alpha on it. Okay, you can get a real nice kind of chipped away effect there. And again, I'm Dynameshing as I go along. Okay. And if I feel it's doing a bit too much of a rough job, I'll just switch back over to my Trim Dynamic. I would say try to avoid using smooth for anything like this. Okay, so when you hold down Shift, it converts it to smooth. You generally don't want to smooth much when it comes to making something that's as rough as this. Just use Trim Dynamic, or you can even use a bit of clay buildup too. So what I'll do if I go to clay buildup is I'll create these kind of circular motions like this, and if I hold down Alt, I'll also sculpt into the model, and I use that to not necessarily smooth out an area but kind of soften it. And as I'm doing that, if you look, I'm getting this wonderful kind of rough texture that you would naturally get with a rocky surface anyway, so it's fantastic for this kind of stuff. I'm keeping the shape relatively box-like for now. That is deliberate, because when we make all the different variations of this, that will be where we start to create a few size differences and shape differences as well, for that matter. Right, I'm not going to do too much more than that for now. To prepare it for texturing, we do need a bit more geometry. It's currently at 113,000 polys. That is not really enough, so I'm just going to go ahead and type in 300 here. I'm just going to control, click and drag, and as you can see, that's gone up to 632,000, so that's fine. So to kick things off, go to the standard brush, turn off Z-Add, turn on RGB, turn on drag rect. You can put an alpha on it as well if you want to soften the edges. And let's go and import some images. Now, I'm going to import one of the photos that I've found just to kick things off, and I'm just going to click and drag on the model to drag that out. And you know what, that hasn't done the worst job. It's stretching, obviously it will stretch around the edges. Try not to worry too much about that. That is part of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Control, which will swap my brush to a mask, and I'm just going to mask out parts of this. If I hold down Control and I click and drag, it will draw a little box around certain areas as well. And I'm just going to mask it all, but maybe that one side for now. And I'm going to go ahead and import other little textures that you saw me hash together in Photoshop. Now, I don't want to be too pedantic with them yet, because it doesn't matter. I'm going to hit Control-I to invert the mask. I'm just going to extend the mask to the top part, hit Control-I again. I'm going to import the lighter tile variation I've got of that. As I say, don't be too pedantic about it yet, it doesn't matter. It's very much a case of dragging out your textures to ensure you've covered each part of the model here. This is going to be very much rinse and repeat at this point until the whole model is covered. So, now that we've done that, it's time to start manually adding in some more paint detail. So, one of the places I like to start is with the dam standard. So, if I go to D, you'll see the dam standard brush here. Now, what the dam standard brush does is it paints in these tiny crevices like that, you see. Now, what I like to do is to turn on RGB so that I polypaint at the same time, and I'm going to knock this intensity down to around 50. And you'll notice that when I make this crevice now, it also paints in one of the swatches. I want that to be the other way around. When I paint into the model, I want it to be dark, and when I paint out from the model, I want it to be light. So I'm just going to press a V to invert them. I'm going to change the colour slightly, little details like that. And I can lower the intensity still again. If I hold down Alt, I'm going to get these wonderful highlights. So again, it's very much rinse and repeat what I've just told you. Switch between your brushes, switch between standard to drag out those images onto the object. Go to your dam standard to paint in those crevices and to punch out those highlights. And then if you switch back to your clay build-up brush, you'll also be able to sculpt in some of that gritty detail without having to worry about polypaint. Each brush will save your settings. You don't have to worry about constantly adjusting that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create multiple variations of this. So what I'm going to do is under subtool I can duplicate this. Okay, shortcut for that is Control Shift D, and I'm going to move this around a little. I'm going to rotate it. I can scale it a little. I can taper it. So take advantage of the deformation panel here. Yeah, so taper on the y-axis is quite a useful one to use there. And I can add a bit more sculpting detail if I want to. Can alter the shape of it a bit, create more of a cap at the top if I want, something like that. Have more parts that perhaps come out of it a little. Let's try to think about how light is going to strike the object as well. Where is going to be the area that's highlighted? Where's going to be the area that's darker? And again, I'm just going to hit Control-Shift-D. I'm going to make loads of these. And again, alter the shape ever so slightly. So this is why I prefer to Polypaint and Sculpt at the same time. I'm not saying that this would be the final result. You would still want to go into something like Substance Painter and get some generators to really punch out that end final quality that's going to be much crisper, maybe not as washed out. But from a creativity point of view, when you're brainstorming a little bit and you're just trying to come up with ideas without having to worry so much about all the technical aspects of it, this is just great. It's quite therapeutic, relaxing. You can forget the world while you do it. I love it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do for the next X amount of time, is just really kind of experiment a bit. Don't be afraid to duplicate as many subtools as you like. Keep rotating, keep messing around with the deformation panel as well. Just see what kind of has a bit more of a natural fit, and really look at your reference images, of course, whilst you're doing this. So another thing you can do here, if you go to Z plugin and you go to Subtool Master and go to mirror, you can mirror one of the subtools around like so. Okay, so once you've got to a point where you're relatively happy with how this cluster looks, what you want to do is click Merge Visible. Now when you do that, what it will do, it will create a merged sculpt. So you can always go back to your original sculpt that's got everything separated, but you also can work on the merged, which will have everything as one subtool. Now, once you're on the merged sculpt, and I advise you save before you do this, you can go ahead and you can Dynamesh. And what that will do, that will get rid of all the wasted in between geometry that you're not going to see. So now what I'd like to do would be to create a small environment around this area. I'm going to insert a cube, and I'm going to use this cube as a floor for our rocks here. So this will all help to build up part of the terrain. So I'm just going to scale this out a little bit. I'm aware that everything's getting a little large again, so I'm just going to scale it all down uniform. And again, I'm just going to use this as an opportunity to build some surroundings here. And even with this huge cluster of rocks, I'm still going to apply the same principle of duplicating the subtool, rotating it, tapering it. I can even bring in some of the subtools that were more isolated from earlier and enlarge them and start adjusting them as well. So polypainting the actual terrain underneath is done the exact same way. I've just pieced together some photo-bashed grass textures, and I've made lighter variations of them, darker variations, same with some moss and some dirt and rubble, and I'm just distributing that under and around all of these monoliths, these pillars, these rocks, all of this kind of terrain, these cliff edgings. Really just keep looking at your reference images. The technique is still the same. Rinse and repeat, keep experimenting, just stick with it. The first time you do it, it won't be great, but the second time will be a bit better, third time better still, so on and so forth. Okay, so we're mostly there with the Polypaint. There is one other little thing that I want to do to this just to give it a bit more pop, and that is to bake an AO into this. So an AO is an ambient occlusion. It's effectively a set of crevice shadows, an occlusion of what is constantly in shadow. So to do that, I'm going to go to Z plugin, I'm going to go to ambient occlusion, and you've got some settings here that you can play around with. I like to go kind of midway with everything, so I'm just going to go to half on the aperture, and then on the distance I'm going to go to 0.5, and I'm just going to hit compute, and it will compute where it thinks those shadows are going to be, and it will mask them. So as you can see, it's applied a little mask to that area of where those shadows will be. Now this currently is not baked into the texture. Okay, in order to do that, if I hit Control I, it will invert the mask. I'm going to turn on RGB, and I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to go to fill object. Now that, if I just hit Control and drag in an empty space, that has filled that unmasked area with a really dark shadow. Now that might be a little intense, okay, so just hit undo and play around with the settings again maybe. I'm going to go for a little bit of a tighter shadow and a little less intense, so I'll just go to Z plugin, go to ambient occlusion. I might put this down to say 0.4 this time perhaps. Get it to compute again. There it is, it's masked. I'm going to hit Control I, and this time I'm going to put the intensity down to around 70, and I'm going to go to color, fill object, and I'm obviously filling that with a black color, okay, so color, fill object. Okay, Control drag to deselect. That's better. That is now baked into my Polypaint. So when I export out my color texture, it will take that ambient occlusion out of it. That's a wrap for this video. So in the next video, we'll have a look at turning all of this into a low poly. Thanks for watching. If this is the first time you're on my channel, subscribe for more, pop your questions below, and I'll catch you next time.